Is Europe turning fascist? The word fascism gets thrown around so casually today that it is beginning to lose its historical meaning. A politician talks about family values or stricter immigration laws and is called a fascist. At that point, fascism becomes a personality type, a mood, an aesthetic. Instead of melodrama, Marxism-Leninism asks what class function fascism performs. Georgy Dimitrov gave the Communist International's famous answer in 1935. Fascism in power, he said, was the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. For Dimitrov, fascism wasn't simply angry nationalism bubbling upward from frightened middle-class people. Ruined shopkeepers, unemployed veterans, frightened professionals, and backward sections of workers could provide its mass base. Fascism could recruit their anger and fear, but that did not tell us which class ultimately benefited from fascist power. Dimitrov's argument was that fascism represented a change in the form of bourgeois class rule. Bourgeois democracy and fascist dictatorship preserve the same capitalist property relations. Under democracy, elections continue and governments change, but the banks remain and factories remain privately owned. The basic relationship between capital and labor survives every election. Fascism becomes necessary when these ordinary mechanisms of bourgeois rule become inadequate for maintaining that order. That is why we should look at the conditions in which European fascism actually conquered power. Because Italy in 1922 and Germany in 1933 looked very different from Europe today. Italy and the two Red Years, Italy emerged from the First World War battered by inflation, unemployment, debt, and enormous social tension. Then came the Biennio Rosso, the two Red Years of 1919 and 1920. Italy experienced enormous strikes, peasant struggles, and factory occupations. Socialist organizations expanded rapidly. Workers occupied factories across the industrial north, and factory councils emerged that Marxists, such as Antonio Gramsci, saw as possible embryos of workers' power. Agricultural laborers and peasants organized around wages, land, and control. Hanging over everything was an event only a few years old, the Russian Revolution. When Italian industrialists and landowners looked at occupied factories, socialist municipalities, and militant unions, revolution did not appear to them as an academic theory. In this environment, fascist squads performed a concrete class function. They burned socialist headquarters, wrecked union offices, destroyed cooperatives, terrorized peasant organizations, and violently overthrew left-wing municipal administrations. Increasingly, sections of Italian landowners and industrial capital supported the reaction. The relationship was not identical for every capitalist, but the class pattern is difficult to miss. Then came the Biennio Nero, the two black years, an organized employers' reaction against socialist strength and the factory occupations. Giovanni Agnelli of Fiat welcomed fascism's arrival in power, was appointed senator in 1923, and regarded Mussolini as capable of restoring political authority and social order. The relationship extended beyond Fiat. Alberto Pirelli developed a close relationship with Mussolini and became an important intermediary between the regime and Italian industry. In Tuscany, major agrarian and industrial interests, including Paolo Guicciardini, the Peruzzi de' Medici, and industrialist Max Bondi, supported the emerging anti-socialist reaction. The alliances varied, but their function remained remarkably consistent: break organized labor and restore capitalist authority in the workplace and countryside. Germany provides an even clearer example. The German Empire collapsed in 1918 amid revolution. Workers' and soldiers' councils appeared across the country, followed by Revolutionary Berlin, the Spartacist uprising, and other experiments in workers' power. Eventually came the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD. By the early 1930s, it had become the largest communist party outside the Soviet Union. Then, the Great Depression devastated Germany. Businesses collapsed, banks failed, unemployment exploded, and the parliamentary system fractured. At the same time, communist support increased. In the November 1932 election, the KPD received almost 6 million votes. Millions of Germans were voting for a mass communist party belonging to a broader international movement whose stated objective was the overthrow of capitalism. Immediately to Germany's east stood the Soviet Union. That is the environment in which Hitler came to power. The Nazis' first actions tell us something important about the class function of German fascism. Hitler didn't destroy German monopoly capital. He didn't hand Krupp to the workers or IG Farben to factory councils. He destroyed the independent political power of the working class. The Communist Party was outlawed and the independent trade unions destroyed. There is another revealing detail. Nazi Germany never completely severed itself from international finance. Germany defaulted on or suspended many foreign obligations and imposed extensive capital controls, but one particularly interesting financial relationship survived: the Bank for International Settlements. According to the BIS's own historical account, during the Second World War, the Reichsbank continued to effect transfers. Germany made transfers in gold and Swiss francs even while German armies fought countries whose central banks remained connected to the same international institution. Communists and independent unions became illegal, but an international banking relationship survived. Fascism was never the abolition of capitalism. Its rhetoric against international finance did not mean the abolition of banks, monopoly corporations, or private ownership. Where is the revolutionary working class today? Now return to Europe today. Trade unions have weakened. Protests frequently flare up and disappear, and Europe's radical left parties have achieved only sporadic electoral success. There is no European equivalent of the KPD approaching 6 million votes while belonging to a revolutionary communist international. There is no Biennio Rosso, no network of workers' councils spreading through major industrial centers, and no revolutionary factory occupations threatening capitalist ownership. Perhaps most importantly, there is no equivalent of October 1917 sitting fresh in the memory of every European capitalist. If fascism is a weapon of class rule, we have to ask, what would full fascist dictatorship accomplish for European capital today that bourgeois democracy cannot? At present, bourgeois democracy is doing its job remarkably well. Governments change without touching property relations. Opposition parties channel dissatisfaction into elections. Trade unions negotiate but rarely challenge capitalist ownership itself. People can complain about capitalism and make podcasts about Marx without threatening the ownership of a single major bank. Why abolish elections when elections aren't threatening your property? Why construct an open dictatorship to defeat a revolutionary movement that is presently weak? Neoliberalism already damaged organized labor. The European working class wasn't physically destroyed as the German communist movement was under Hitler. Instead, deindustrialization, privatization, outsourcing, temporary employment, the collapse of the Soviet bloc, and the transformation of social democratic parties weakened organized labor. Neoliberalism accomplished much of this without abolishing parliamentary democracy. Capital did not need black shirts occupying union headquarters. If bourgeois democracy can preserve capitalist property while providing greater political legitimacy, there is little reason for the capitalist class to abandon it. That does not mean reaction should be ignored. European states are increasingly restricting democratic liberties and intensifying repression of political opposition and anti-war protests. Europe does not have to become fascist tomorrow for its political order to become more authoritarian today. The rightward electoral shift is real. In the 2024 European Parliament elections, the conservative ECR increased its representation substantially, while radical right parties made major national gains. France's National Rally finished first, and Germany's AfD finished second. Rather than declaring Europe already fascist, it may be more useful to speak of fascisation or authoritarianization. Expanded surveillance, greater police powers, censorship, pressure on speech, and growing nationalism show ideas and practices moving into the mainstream that previously existed farther outside it. These developments matter, but they should not automatically be confused with fascism. Liberal capitalist states have used censorship, police violence, colonial repression, and restrictions on political organization throughout their histories. A bourgeois democracy can be brutally repressive without becoming fully fascist. The present economic crisis, the old neoliberal economic model, is visibly exhausted. But economic crisis alone does not produce fascism. Something has to give monopoly capital a reason to abandon one political form for another. Historically, revolutionary working-class power supplied an enormous part of that reason. That component is largely absent today. Instead, Europe appears to be moving toward a more interventionist form of state monopoly capitalism, organized around geopolitical competition and rearmament. The European Commission openly argues that defense investment can strengthen industrial competitiveness, technology, employment, and innovation. Its Readiness 2030 program describes military expenditure as producing spillovers into aerospace, shipbuilding, steel, space, transport, and artificial intelligence. The state has rediscovered rearmament as a gigantic guaranteed market. Governments can borrow, order, subsidize, and coordinate production. Missiles do not have to find consumers because governments buy them. Drones, satellites, aircraft, ships, artillery, steel, chemicals, and software can all receive enormous injections of public capital. The authoritarian tendencies we are seeing, therefore, belong to a wider transformation of European capitalism. Europe is becoming more militarized and state-directed, while becoming increasingly willing to restrict political resistance to that transformation. Another difference from the 1930s, the enemy European capital is preparing to confront today is not primarily an organized revolutionary proletariat at all. The strategic confrontation is external. China represents an enormous industrial pole, while Russia represents a military and resource power outside the Western Bloc. The broader Eurasian economy challenges the period in which Western capital dominated global technology, finance, and industrial organization with relatively little competition. Europe is therefore rearming partly because the world system itself is becoming more competitive. This resembles the age of imperialist rivalry more directly than the domestic conditions that produced Hitler and Mussolini. Western ruling classes increasingly confront a China and Russia-centered bloc, offering many developing countries alternative sources of trade, investment, and political alignment. So, what form of capitalist rule does European capital actually need under these conditions? For the moment, the answer appears to be something less dramatic, but perhaps more revealing. An increasingly authoritarian, militarized bourgeois democracy capable of reorganizing European industry for geopolitical competition, while an organized, revolutionary working class remains too weak to stop it. If that balance of class forces changes, the answer to the question of fascism may change with it.